Hi guys, Kim here at Olive City Homestead, and today's video is for those of you who don't have a homestead. For those of you who may not even have a yard, perhaps you just have a slight little patio or a tiny little balcony, but you still want to grow veggies. And today we're going to focus on one veggie in particular that a lot of people really want to grow no matter what size yard or non-yard they have, and that is tomatoes. More specifically, cherry tomatoes, which are one of my favorites too. So this video is for all of you who've never gardened before, or at least not successfully, and who want to grow cherry tomatoes for yourself to eat fresh all summer long. Can you do it? Sure, you really can, and it's easy, and I'm going to show you how right now. And this video is also for my daughter who's in grad school in Hawaii with a tiny little balcony, and she loves cherry tomatoes, and she said, "Mom, what do I do?" So this is a really basic video for those of you who haven't grown before, or again, just haven't clicked with it, haven't got it quite right. Perhaps it's just one or two little things, and believe me, you can do it. It's easy and it's well worth it. You're going to enjoy those cherry tomatoes or whatever veggie you plant all summer long, even on a tiny little balcony. So right now I have tomatoes of a couple different varieties growing here in this raised bed. Volunteers that have come up from last year's yellow pear tomatoes. A random pot or two out in the garden. This was a volunteer that I dug up and plopped in here. More started here. And some in grow bags on my back patio that are actually already ripening. It's the first time I've used grow bags, and I have to say I'm pretty pleased with the results. These were all planted at different times, and they're different varieties, but they're all doing well in this filtered sun patio. But the fact is, you can grow tomatoes almost anywhere. Even if it's just 3 or 4 feet of space, as long as you get 6 hours of sun, you're going to be okay. Those tomatoes are going to grow and you're going to be able to enjoy them. So what kind of pot should you use? What size? Where do you get it? Where do you get the cherry tomatoes? Do you plant them from seed? Do you buy them as a big plant with tomatoes already on it? What's the deal? So you can plant from seed. I planted some cherry tomatoes, these Chadwick ones, and they took about 6 to 8 weeks of growing before they were ready to plant out in the garden. And so that's totally possible. And you can pick those up at a garden center or order online like I do usually from a company like Baker Creek. But for most people, they like to start with a plant. Not a big, huge plant with tomatoes already on it, but just a little plant, maybe 3 to 5 inches tall and ready to start growing. And for a brand new gardener, that's actually a great idea, because then you don't have to deal with the process of not only starting the seeds, but also then nurturing the seedlings, which it's not like it's a difficult thing to do, that process, but it can be tricky trying to get the balance of water and light just right. And then also another plus to having a little plant is that it's already healthy. You pick out a really healthy one, and you don't have to worry also about bugs decimating a good sized little plant the way you do brand new little seedlings. So there are a lot of advantages to starting with a little plant, and one of the biggest ones is that because it is ready to take off and grow when you get it in the pot, you're going to have those cherry tomatoes all the sooner. Okay, so we're at the local big box store, you know the one, Home Depot, okay. And veggies everywhere. And there we go, Husky Cherry Red Hybrid Cherry Tomato. These look nice and healthy, and usually you can find quite a variety of cherry tomatoes at your big box stores. So also another place you can look is at pharmacies. They often have some. So you just grab up 1 or 2 of these, depending on how many cherry tomatoes you want. And here I am at the Tractor Supply store, and they've got veggies too. Super Sweet 100, Sun Sugar Yellows. Oh, look at that, black cherry. So there's always a selection if you just look around. Now this is just one of many varieties of soil you can get for your containers. You'll see that it says raised bed and potting mix. Organic Plus, and it's put out by Kellogg. And it's 2 cubic feet for $8, which is a super good deal. And you don't really need the more expensive ones because you're going to put some material at the bottom of your container, such as leaves from your garden or cut grass, some kitchen scraps, which will build the nutrition in your soil gradually as your plant grows. Okay, we found the pot section, and really any pot will do as long as it's about 12 gallons, maybe 15 gallons would be better, but even 10 would do in a pinch. I'm gonna go with this one right here. I like it. Really, keep it simple. You can find them on sale everywhere. I usually buy pots when they're half price, but if you go to a Home Depot or Walmart, you can find some that are a good price even when they're not on sale. And remember, it's what you're growing that counts. So just keep it simple and make sure it has drainage. And if it doesn't come with drainage holes, it's very simple to put them in, and I'll show you how. Okay, so we've got the pot home, and this is a 10 to 12 gallon, I'm guessing it's about 11 gallons actually, pot, which is really just fine for the cherry tomato plant, or really just about any vegetable plant, maybe not squashes, those probably would need a bigger one. And I'm going to show you another option, which I think is a great option, and you might even have lying around your house somewhere in a closet that you can take advantage of. So, this is what might be called a storage tote, or a container, or a crate, any number of terms for it. This one is about 10 years old, and it's about half full. Yeah, about half full with soil already, and some broken down leaves and such. I've grown in this for several years, and the soil has settled down. This has already got worms in it and such because I've grown in it, and because I had made drainage holes on the bottom of this tote, the worms have crawled up in it. And I did with it something that you can do whether in a crate or in the pot that you get. In the bottom you can put things like kitchen scraps, coffee grounds, eggshells, all kinds of leftovers, and things like brown leaves, green leaves, grass clippings, any kind of organic matter, whether it be something that was growing in your yard or in the park that's now just lying there on the ground. I wouldn't advise you to go picking live things unless it's at a friend's or relative's house. But those things put in the bottom of the soil act like a natural fertilizer and release gradually. And if you can introduce some worms into the equation, just 1 or 2 is all it would take to get started. Those worms will break down all that matter that you put into the soil, and they will not only enrich the soil through breaking down that material, but they also will be pooping in the soil, which is one of the best fertilizers for all plants, especially veggies, is the worm castings. So that's my little plug for using homegrown organic compost, really composting as you grow. And I have a little tip I'll show you in a minute on another way you can do that, because of course once you put the dirt in there, and you plant, then what? Especially in a container that most of you would be using, like this round one, your cherry tomato is going to fill this up, so it's not like you can keep digging down and adding more organic material. So how would you do that? I'll show you. But first, let's talk about the soil. So we're going to go ahead and add this Kellogg raised bed and potting mix soil to both the top of this container to fill it up and to this pot, because not only did I get 1 or 2, but I got 3 little cherry tomato plants. I couldn't resist. I got the black cherry, I got the sun sugar, and I got the husky cherry. So the first thing we need to make sure about is that there's drainage holes. Now most pots will come with drainage holes, but often like these you will have to pop out or push out with a tool. And you may decide that 2 isn't enough, and I would tend to agree. I would think 4 or 6 might be better. And so what I found is the easiest way to add drainage holes to any container, for instance, the crate that I showed you that doesn't have any built-in drainage holes, is to use a soldering iron. So as you can see with this soldering iron, the plastic just quickly melts away as you hold the iron to it. It is such a fast and simple way to make drainage holes. I really can't imagine any other way of doing it. If you do have a metal container, you can use a drill bit to make holes if there are none. You can even make holes in ceramic planters, although I personally have never done that. That would be quite challenging, but if you have the right tool, you can do it. But see how simple? I've just made about 10 drainage holes. Now I've just made them the width of the soldering iron, but you actually could hold that in there and kind of do little circles with it and make the holes wider, but you don't really need to. That would be totally up to you. Another thing that you can do, I didn't do it with this pot, but I've done it on containers that I put out on soil in my garden, is I actually put the drainage holes about an inch or two up from the bottom of the pot or container on the side. And that prevents roots from growing up into your pot, tree roots. But you don't really have to worry about that if you're planting on cement on your balcony or patio. So we have the drainage holes underneath. The other thing you should remember about drainage is, well, it drains. And that means, you don't want it draining somewhere that it might discolor if that's going to bother you or your landlord. So you might want to put a drainage dish underneath it of some sort. That can be anything from a crate lid to a bucket lid to a dish that's actually for the purpose of catching drain water, but something so that you don't have discolored cement. The other thing you can do is regularly wash off your patio or cement, and that way you don't have to worry about it. Or if you have cement like mine, which is actually just more like cobblestone, you wouldn't even notice any issue at all, so you wouldn't have to worry about it. Time to add the soil. I think we can agree that this is pretty simple. That was a half a bag of that 2 cubic foot bag of soil, and a half a bag was perfect for this about 11-gallon container. So I would say you only need a 1 cubic foot, and that's assuming you did not put anything on the bottom, because with this one, I did not put anything on the bottom, no leaves, grass clippings, food scraps, nothing, because I'm going to show you how to use regular store-bought fertilizer in this container. All right, the crate is now full. Time to plant the tomatoes. Okay, so I've decided on this setup. Now the pot is going to take one of the cherry tomatoes, the sun sugar, and the crate is big enough at 17 gallons to take 2 cherry tomato plants and something else. The crate is also going to take this. And what is this? Well, it was a coffee container. I don't personally drink this kind of coffee. I prefer to use beans I grind myself, but you always have somebody you know that does. Or you can use something smaller than this. You can also use like a yogurt container, anything with a lid on top like this. And you can see I've soldered a few holes in it, and there are some holes on the bottom. And I'm going to bury this, nestle it down in there about an inch. And what am I putting in here? Green leaves, brown leaves. That's some purple tree kale that was getting old. Under that, there's, what else? Oh, we've got some eggshell and coffee grounds. Coffee grounds are great for your garden. Lots of micronutrients in there that will, as you water, go down into the soil and will organically and naturally provide great nutrition for your plants. Now, another way you can feed your plants if you don't want to try the natural method, and I'm all for doing whatever works for you, is to get a store-bought fertilizer. Do try to get an organic one. They're really not that much more expensive, and then I feel, and a lot of people feel, they're much better for your plants and for you. You can get basically 2 kinds. You can get a granular form that you put on once every 4 to 6 weeks, and you go by the directions on the label. But for cherry tomatoes, you can actually use half the recommended amount. Or you can get the powder form of tomato food It's often pink color, but that powder form is water soluble, and that kind you would be applying once every week. You would dissolve it in a gallon of water and apply it as you water. This one you're going to sprinkle on once every 4 to 6 weeks around the plant, not too close to its roots, and it will dissolve slowly over time. Either way, natural, where you just keep adding food scraps and leaves that you pick up off the ground, grass cuttings, anything like that is great for your plants. And try to find a worm or tube somewhere that you can plop in there. They'll appreciate it, and so will your plants. Now let's get these in the soil. So with your hand or a little shovel, you dig out a hole that is basically going to have your plant at the same height, soil height, as it was in its little pot. That looks good. So now I'm going to take it out of the pot. Now, you want to handle your tomato plant as little as possible when doing this. So you will water the plant very well before you take it out. So it should slip right out. And it does. Look at all those roots. Now you're going to flip it over and plop it right there in the soil. Take the tag, but don't lose it. You'll want to keep that. Because believe me, you think you're going to remember which one is which, but you won't. Unless you're some really interesting person that I've never met, everybody forgets what they plant. Now, I suppose if you only plant one, then you probably won't forget. But even then, you might if you throw that tag away. So, yeah, my hardest part when growing from seed is to remember to make labels and make sure those labels are permanent, because I always had a problem with whatever ink I used disappearing after a month. Water and sun will do that. And then, even though I started off well, I ended up not knowing what was what. But right now I know that this is my black cherry tomato plant. And I think it looks very happy there and that it's going to do very well there. So yeah, you want to have your stem at the same height as it was. Now, tomatoes are pretty famous for the fact that you can plant them pretty deep and they'll develop extra roots. But really, if you're getting a plant that's this size that you're getting at the store and it already looks super healthy like these do, you're not going to need to do that. Sometimes when you grow them from seeds, you might end up with some that are a little tall and leggy, and then it does benefit to plant them a little more deeply. Let's go ahead and plant the other two now. Now, if you notice some growth coming from the very bottom, you can just snap that off because it's not going to hurt the plant at all. So this little bit right here, I'm just going to snap that right off. And I'm just going to throw it in the hole because it'll just break down in there. And there's another bit. It could potentially lead to too crowded conditions down there where it stays too wet and fungus might start developing. So I just cleared the bottom up a bit. Now I'm putting it in there. Oh, maybe a little bit deeper. There we go. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty, by the way. Or you can wear gloves if that's what you prefer. Whatever works for you makes you enjoy what you're doing. I kind of like getting my hands in the soil. Now, again, I watered these plants very thoroughly in their little pots before I planted them. That's kind of important because you don't want your plant to go into transplant shock and be very dry when it goes in there. You also can make sure to water the soil you're planting it in beforehand. That's good too, but if you forget that, at the very least, have watered your plants ahead of time and they will do fine. Let's get that tag in. That is my husky cherry red. Last but not least, we're going to plant the sun sugar cherry tomato, which this is a known quantity to me. I grow it every year. I originally did buy a few plants. They did super well, and I found them to be absolutely delicious. The Sun Sugar and the Sun Gold cherry tomatoes are my favorite cherry tomatoes at this point. But what I also found out is both of these reseed themselves every year. If a few fall onto the ground, if you have them out in the garden, they just volunteer the next year from the seeds that have fallen. Now, if you're in a pot, they're not going to naturally do that, but you could help that. If you do leave a few cherry tomatoes in the dirt over the winter, you're going to have some volunteers the next year. Will they grow exactly the same? Perhaps not exactly, because these are hybrids. But I've had them come back and they taste so close I can't tell the difference. And then, that's a neat, really easy way to grow plants. by volunteers because they come up when they're ready, and they usually do super well. And there we have the 3 plants all planted. In this crate, I've got the natural organic fertilizer that's going to break down gradually and that I'm going to continue adding to every week. And in the pot, I have the slow release granular fertilizer that I am going to kind of stir into the soil. There we go. And this is an even balanced fertilizer, so it's a 13, 13, 13 with all 3 elements being equally balanced. We don't want that nitrogen, which is the first number you see on fertilizer, to be higher than the others. Now, if you are using the store-bought fertilizer rather than the natural one, then when you start seeing blossoms on the plant, you're going to want to switch to a configuration where the middle number, which is the phosphorus, is higher than the other 2 numbers. And this will help your fruit to grow more productively rather than just producing a lot of leaves and green growth, which is what that first number, the nitrogen, would do. So again, when you first plant your cherry tomato or any veggie, but especially right now we're talking about cherry tomatoes, you're going to want that to be a balanced fertilizer that you're using. So this happens to be a 13, 13, 13, but it could be a 10, 10, 10, a 20, 20, 20, anything like that. But once you start seeing blossoms, then you're going to switch to one where the middle number, the phosphorus, is higher. And again, you can use the granular that's slow release or the powder water soluble fertilizer that you add into your water every week. Personally, I like the way of doing it this way, and I have huge tomato harvests every year using natural fertilizer. So I encourage you to try it and see what you think. Now we need to water. Of course, you might have a hose on your balcony, but if you don't, you can use a watering can. You also could just use a cup, say an empty Starbucks cup or a coffee cup or a tea pitcher or a bowl. Anything that can carry water can be used. However, I will say that these are the 2 most common. This type of spout, as you're all familiar with, and this type of kind of teapot spout. Personally, I recommend this for pots. Why is that? Because the water comes out in a narrow, focused stream that you can direct very easily. Because if there's one thing I can emphasize to you about watering, okay, let's take that back. If there are 2 things I can emphasize to you about watering, the first is don't get your leaves wet. As many videos as you might see where people are watering happily in the sunshine and the leaves are all getting wet on their plants that they're watering, I will tell you that is never a good thing. You might get away with it depending on how hot it is and the kind of plant you're watering. However, you probably won't. Leaves don't like to be wet in the sun and will burn to a crisp. Even though you don't feel like it's too hot, they very well might. And anytime I have accidentally gotten my leaves wet, because I'm in a very warm zone, even if I am watering in the morning, my leaves will burn. So I'm very careful not to wet my leaves. I water early in the morning or in the evening or in the shade. I make sure that my leaves never get wet. And if they do, if there's any chance of it, which when they get bigger, they are going to get wet, especially if you don't clear out the bottom. You'll notice that on my tomatoes that I have in the grow bags, I have cleared out the bottom pretty much, and I will continue to do so. And that's because it's a lot easier to water the plant and not get leaves wet if there's not stuff growing on the bottom. But if they do, I want it to be when they're not in the sun, when they're in the shade or the sun has gone down. So that's very important. And that's why I like the focused water pot better, because this one, although it's bigger and it can do a lot of watering, as you can see, you can't really control how the water comes out. When I do this, it waters, but look at that. It might splash up on the leaves. I feel nervous even doing it to show you, so I'm not going to. I think it did splash that first tomato plant, so I pulled it back in the shade a bit. And that is one big advantage that I have here with a roof on this patio, is that I have filtered sun and I can move plants around to be more in the shade when I want to. And if you have a patio or a balcony with a roof, you can take advantage of that. If you have a patio or balcony where half of the area gets shade all day, you can move it around. If you have, as most people do, an area that gets sun for part of the day and shade for part of the day, that is okay, by the way. These cherry tomatoes really only need 4 to 6 hours of strong sun a day. So that should be doable in most locations. And in fact, if you are in an area like me, Zone 9B, where it gets super hot, as in over 90, here it can get up to 110, even 115, your tomatoes will stop growing at about 90, 95 degrees. They'll just sort of hit the pause button, so don't let that worry you. But if you're in an area that gets between 70 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit most of the time, then your tomatoes will keep growing all summer long. And if it's getting there, up there 85, 90, 95 or more, you might need to put a shade cloth up or in some way offer them some filtered sun. But if they're only getting, say, 4 hours a day, then you really won't have to worry about it. They can handle that much. Here, where mine get, say, 12 hours a day, they definitely need to either be in filtered sun somewhere or have a shade cloth over them. So with the water, the second most important thing is do it consistently. Don't water real well for a week and then forget about it for a week or two. Your plants will die, or at least mightily struggle and not produce well. Here, where it's super hot, if I don't water for even 2 days, I'm going to lose my plants. So you have to know your area. If you are in a warm area, you need to water every day. You don't want the soil to be soggy, but you do want it to be damp down 2 or 3 inches. So if you stick your finger in, it should feel damp all the way to your second knuckle. If it doesn't feel damp, then you need to water. However, it should not be soupy and soggy. That they wouldn't like either. So as long as you water consistently, with me, it's every single morning, early morning, then you're going to be just fine. And if you are in a cooler place that only gets up to, say, 80 every day, and that is cool to me, you might be able to get away with once every other day or two. If your leaves start to yellow, that probably means they're getting too much water. And if they start to wilt, they might need more water, or at least to be pulled in the shade. One last thing I should mention is that you will want to put a tomato cage around your plant while it's young so that it's easy. It becomes awkward if you wait till it's big. Or you can also use a stake. If you use a stake, you're going to be tying up the center stalk every 4 to 6 inches against the stake. And these little ridges, you can see there, will hold your string in place. Masking tape also works. Yarn or masking tape are my preferred methods, although they do have a sort of green plant tape you can use. But I do prefer yarn or masking tape. And I usually go with cages, especially for a cherry tomato plant because they're not very heavy. Some of the tomatoes that have really large tomatoes, I would actually use a combination of a tall stake, especially if they're an indeterminate plant, and that means they would keep growing and growing, whereas a determinate tomato is a bush. And I also would use a trellis. So some of the tomatoes I have out in the garden, I'm going to be putting on wire trellises. But in a pot, my best recommendation is to get a simple wire tomato cage. Again, you can buy that at any of the big box stores for a few bucks. And basically, your goal is to put the branches above the different levels of wire, which is why it's easier to do when it is young. You can imagine if I took this wire cage and tried to put it over a very multi-branched tomato plant, it would be really difficult. So get it on while your plant is, well, if you put it on now, it would be super simple, wouldn't it? You will, of course, as it grows, have to put the different branches above the different levels of wire. But you can do that every few days or once a week, and it's not a problem. And then your plants will have all the support they need, and they won't have any broken branches as the tomatoes get heavy. And that's how easy it is to plant cherry tomatoes, so you can do it. It's simple, it's fast, and before you know it, you're going to be enjoying cherry tomatoes in your own backyard or on your own balcony. Thanks for joining me today, folks, and I hope that you will go ahead and plant your cherry tomatoes and other veggies too on your own backyard balcony or patio, and be confident that you can do this. It's easy, it's fast, and it's delicious, so go for it. Remember, you can create the garden and the life you want, so don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise. See you next time, folks. I see 2 ripe tomatoes there. This is a small size, not a cherry, but not a big tomato. It's about the size, I'd say, of a small tangerine. And I see 2 really dark red ones that look delicious. I think I may need to harvest them. My first tomatoes of 2021 mid-May harvest.